but over the course of time, people will see that I know just as much about it as anyone else.
Sir, I'm sorry. Could you come up a little bit so the microphone?
Yeah.
People can't hear you. Thank you, sir.
So you think voters are misunderstanding how much you know about foreign policy?
Well, I mean, look at what the media has come up with, the kinds of assassination jobs. I think it will come back up. We'll see.
Dr. Carson, you've been equating the female shooting suspect in California with furthering your point of not allowing Syrian refugees into the U.S. The suspect was not passed through the refugee screening. She held a fiancé visa. How does this shooting prove that the Syrian refugee process does not work if she was vetted through a different process and wasn't a refugee?
The point is we have inadequate vetting processes for bringing people in here. And that should be an alarm system for all.
Well, what would you propose that we do about the fiancé visa program in particular, given the fact that she was here on one?
Well, right now, anybody coming from that area of the world who is going through this so-called wonderful vetting process, I think I would suspend that process until we have a much better vetting process. And I would actually apply some logic here. You know, it doesn't solve a problem to bring 10 or 20 or 30,000 Syrians to this country when we have a perfectly adequate place to take care of them over there. And it doesn't solve any problems. All it does is create potential problems. So at some point, we have to be logical and start thinking in a logical fashion.
Dr. Carson, after the Planned Parenthood shooting, you talked about civility and the lack of civility on both sides of the argument. Basically earning some criticism from pro-life groups. What kind of rhetoric from the pro-life side have you been seeing that you would label uncivil?
Well, when people say, I understand why he might do something like that, that would be uncivil. But, you know, the fact of the matter is, what we have to do as Americans is be able to talk to each other. If we cannot talk to each other, how are we ever going to solve our problems? If one side is saying you're horrible and the other side is saying you're horrible, but no one is sitting down at the table and talking about the rationale for their beliefs, then we will continue to fight each other, and it's the very last thing we need to be doing right now.
Dr. Carson, do you think that the U.S. should reinstate the metadata program or like Americans suffering?
Well, it may be reasonable to examine the program and ask yourself, how can we utilize this program in a way to protect ourselves and at the same time not infringe on people's Fourth Amendment rights? We haven't sat down and had that discussion in depth right now. We need to have that in-depth discussion.
Do you think the program could have prevented or helped to prevent these attacks in San Bernardino?
Probably not, but it still needs to be looked at. It needs to be refined in such a way that we satisfy both our ability to investigate people that are suspicious and protect the Fourth Amendment rights of
Do you
citizens.
think it should be refined and reinstated?
It needs to be refined. It needs to be refined.
Dr. Carson, will you respond to people who are saying that you think hummus runs Gaza following your remarks at the Republican-Jewish coalition?
Yes, well, I said Hamas, and then I corrected it in the same sentence, Hamas. But did they talk about that? No. Do people make mistakes sometimes when they're speaking? Do they say things like corpsemen? Of course they do.
During that speech, you read from a script. It's not your usual style. It was a speech about foreign policy, which in the media you've been getting a lot of criticism for. Why did you choose to read directly from the script when talking about?
Because I had a lot of points that I wanted to get across, and I wanted to make sure I got them all across.
Do you feel like it was successful?
Just a question about the San Bernardino shootings. It's now, as you know, being investigated as a terrorist attack. President Obama initially responding to the attack on the day of said that it shouldn't be so easy to acquire guns. He said you have people on a no-fly zone list who are able to board planes, aren't able to board planes, but can still purchase guns. What's your response to that? You've initially said that there are people on a no-fly zone list that have issues getting off, they don't know why they're there, and you want to preserve their Second Amendment rights. Do you think, in light of the recent attacks, that that's something that should be examined?
I think we need to find a better way to determine who's on those lists and give them, you know, a rationale for the reason that they're on that list. And once you've done that, then I have no problem with, you know, some restrictions. But until you do that, it doesn't make any sense. It's very arbitrary.
Dr. Carson, how concerned are you that Ted Cruz seems to be sort of starting to eat your lunch here in Iowa with the polling and support?
Well, you know, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So, you know, poll numbers go up and down. They have been since the beginning, and they will continue to do so.
Is he
So,
the biggest threat
so
to your candidacy?
I do not worry about anyone specifically. My job, I'm not a politician, so I'm not going to react like a politician. I'm not going to answer like a politician. No. My job is to continue to tell the truth and to be who I am and let the people make a decision.
Dr. Carson, you said to a group of veterans in Waterloo today that, quote, the U.S. should be dealing with the transgender issue somewhere else. You asked the question, why do you have to go around flaunting your sexuality? Where do you think we should be dealing with this issue, if not in the military, given that it's such a big issue?
The military has a very important job. That job is to protect us. The last thing they need are a bunch of distractions.
Dr. Carson, you often say that we shouldn't be fighting the politically correct war. Donald Trump earlier this week kind of used that same language and said that we should be going after ISIS, their family members, and not protecting civilians as much as we do now. Do you agree with that?
I believe that we need to continue to go after ISIS, particularly over there. And we need to keep them on the run so they don't have time to be doing things over here. I've said that for months and months and months, and what has happened recently doesn't change that.
Are we being too cautious about civilians? About trying to avoid it?
Well, there's
Civilian casualties?
no question that you can't fight a politically correct war. And that's why I said, you know, if oil trucks are coming out of there and you're saying, I can't bomb them because of the person in there, that doesn't make any sense. You just say, we're bombing anything that comes out of there. So you better have a robot driving it if you don't want a person to get killed. That's the way you fight a war.
Dr. Carson, just a follow-up question with the transgender.
Okay, who hasn't asked a question?
I have not asked a question.
Okay.
As a representative of the millennial generation, my goal is to just get them to simply care and to be the generation to get this country on track. So what can you tell me that I can tell them to make that happen?
That's a very good question.
Thank you.
The millennial generation, I think, has the opportunity to make the U-turn because the generations before them have tended to think more about themselves. And as a result, it leaves the millennial generation in a pickle financially because they're the ones who are now responsible for this $18.5 trillion national debt and some of the other things. What I would tell the millennials is that you need to please start thinking once again, not only about yourself, but about the people who are coming behind you. So when you begin to develop policies, please develop those policies with your children and your grandchildren in mind. Now, as far as the millennials are concerned themselves, you know, I think people in my generation are going to have to start being creative. You know, people in the millennial generation come up with these incredible college goals. You know, we have to start thinking about things like making the colleges responsible for the interest and the student only responsible for the principal. And then the college will be much more careful about raising their rates, and they'll be looking for other ways for the students to be able to finance their education. Because right now, 1.3 trillion of the 18.5 trillion is student debt. That's completely unacceptable.
Dr. Carson,
Thank you very much.